Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series, Mobile Accessibility, Everything You Need to Know. This is episode 1 of a 3-part series that we're hosting here at Kobiton. And today we have Helen Burge from Teslio and Frank Moyer joining us. My name is Danielle, and we're going to jump right in here to some introductions. I'll let everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll cover some housekeeping items and get started.
Yes, I'm Frank Moyer. I'm the CTO at Kobiton and excited about the session today. Thank you, Danielle, for hosting this.
Yeah, no problem.
And I am Helen Burge, the Senior Accessibility Testing Manager at Teslio. And just because the audience is more likely to be Kobiton aware, Teslio is a software testing company that partners with Kobiton. And we are the originator of fused software testing, a unique approach of testing that combines humans and machines to help digital innovators deliver quality products at scale. Obviously, I just do the testing side.
And you do it super well. Teslio is actually one of our proud partners here at Kobiton, so we're happy to have you. We're going to jump into the agenda here in a second, but I wanted to remind everyone who's joining in today or watching on demand at a later date that you are more than welcome to put questions in the chat. And if we don't get to them today, a product guru is what I like to call them, friends of Kobiton and friends of Teslio, will reach out to you and answer your questions, and you can talk more about them with them. So without further ado, today we're going to dig into the state of accessibility and where we're going, the future of accessibility with automation, implementing accessibility strategies and risk, some takeaways, and a wrap up. So as always, we will jump right in, and we have a funny little quote here as we were preparing for this. Helen suggested that mobile accessibility may be seen as a dark art, but are we talking about Harry Potter, Helen? What does this mean? You're the expert here.
Well, I wouldn't quote Harry Potter, more supernatural. But anyway, it's more the fact that mobile accessibility is something that hasn't been totally catered for by the W3C. So a lot of companies, when they have a mobile app, are not quite sure where to start or how to approach the testing, how to make the web content guidelines apply to a mobile app. And I always say it's seen as a dark art because until we explain that it doesn't have to be overcomplicated, people will be put off even trying, I think. That's the reason why I say, and yes, I do have a thing for Sam out of Supernatural, so.
The actual WCAG document is a pretty long document. So do you think that contributes to why people feel it's daunting?
Yes, and the terminologies that are used within the document are very open to interpretation. And a lot of people have their own interpretations. However, the success criterion are very limited. The understanding documents have a lot more context, but it's a success criterion that you have to meet to be accessible. And that can be a very simple 1 or 2 sentence phrase that is still quite open-ended, which is why there's documents about the documents to make sure you understand it. However, the main limitations that the W3C had with creating the guidelines is the fact that you're trying to make something that's recreatable, retestable, and will cover different user types in an easy to represent way. And some user types have been not as well represented in the last version 2.1 because it has been difficult to get a consensus of what is needed.
Right.
And as you know, 2.2 is just around the corner. That corner's been quite a long corner, but it's coming.
Yeah, and at Kobiton, we sort of see 2 main categories of customers coming in, and those aren't always mutually exclusive, but the first category is those who want to create great mobile experiences, and they see accessibility as a part of that. And the second group are those that are afraid of the litigation that is currently aplenty in the market, and they're trying to protect against their brand in being a subject of litigation. And again, these aren't mutually exclusive, but I could imagine that if you're in the latter category, you want to make sure that the letter from the WCAG is crystal clear, because you're afraid that that could be used against you in a court of law. Is that fair?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
it's going to bring us right into our next slide here.
Awesome.
Talking about
Danielle,
accessibility.
you're going to have to push
Today's
us.
world.
We're going to
I
keep
know.
going.
No, this is perfect. I just wanted everyone to know that we have more than a few slides here for you. So I want everyone to get the full presentation because you guys are just the bomb. So yeah, no, Frank and Helen, continue to dig in here. I know what this means for me today. I mean, I have the little assistive touch. I've seen different accessibility features in apps. I've seen mostly through Kobiton's lens, I will say, but it's made me so much more aware of, you know, what's possible and what will be needed really in the future. So what does this mean for everyone?
Well, some of the tools you mentioned hopefully shouldn't be needed with all applications. Some of them are operating system changes people can do to suit their needs, but some of them, like there's the magnifier tool that increases the size of how your screen is shown. That is a tool I think is there, but it shouldn't need it to be there. It should be that maybe applications should allow you to do the pinch zoom like you would do on the web browser. And a lot of people assume that it's not needed because others don't do it. And the zooming in, the text resizing is one that is often overlooked. And I often say, first thing in the morning, if I get one of those emails, you know, that's got a lot of text in it, I'm one of those people that will pinch in and zoom in because I haven't had my coffee. I haven't got my glasses on and I want to be able to read it. And if I have to do the same for my, like say, if I've got an app telling me that I've got a shopping order on the way, I might want to zoom in to check what items I'm expecting and so on. There's no excuse for limiting the users or saying, oh, they can use a tool in their setup. It should be built in into the application so that people don't have to use tools. I mean, obviously, there are tools like screen readers that someone who can't see the screen will use to hear what's on the screen. But some of the tools are additional nice to haves that shouldn't be needed to interact with your phone. And we all know, oh, sorry, Frank.
No, I've built mobile apps, and I think, it is a great thing to aspire to. I do know that it gets complicated quickly when building mobile apps, and because you're trying to create a great user experience for all users. And that means that as a result, you could end up confusing a certain user base by adding complexity for, being able to zoom into text. So, when 90%, how do you design that accordingly? And are there maybe operating system settings that would allow you to make that adjustment within your app instead of, at the app level?
You can do, yes. Sorry.
I wanted to pop in and ask a question here because I know this is a passion of Frank's, and Helen, you just see it every day. We discussed this in one of our previous webinars, like perfecting the mobile experience in the mobile first world. Like, I'm on my phone the second I wake up, it's my alarm, I'm checking the weather, I'm checking my email. Like Helen said, I'm zooming in. Yes, one eye may be more blurry than the other, but how does an organization, large or small, achieve this type of mobile maturity, especially considering accessibility may be on the newer front? It's not new, but it's becoming more prevalent and popular. How do people in organizations prepare for this? And what does mobile maturity look like for serving all of your users?
For me personally, it's not leaving it to the last point. I've talked about agile and accessibility before, and it doesn't have to be the massive audit at the end of the life cycle where it's more costly to fix. It's better starting where the design comes in, looking at the designs. So things like operating system changes, allowing for the user to set their text size to their preferred size, and to allow it to show the text of that size. If they choose to have it that they have one letter that fits in the width of the screen, that might be a bit excessive. Who knows? But it's all personal choice, isn't it? But at the same time, having it so that you can change the text size to certain percentages and so on is a good thing, because it allows a user to set it up to what suits them. And there's things like dark mode, where you can change it to dark mode, but if the app doesn't respect that, it can be difficult for the person to see certain items, and or it might be like, for instance, here we have dark text with a mainly white background. Some people prefer it the inverse way, where it's mainly dark with the light text, and it's all user preference. You can never design something that will work for all users, but you can design it that they can tweak the bits that are hard for you to program every eventuality, as it were.
What's funny is I thought the dark mode was something special developers used to just do, because at one of my first roles at a fintech company, I sat near all of the QAs and all the developers. There were rows of them, and all of their screens were super dark. And I was like, I don't know how they do that. But they also liked to sit with the lights off. So it is what it is. We were coding in a cave.
Oh dear, sorry.
I know. I think this also goes right into our next slide here, which I know I wanted to talk about how developers and testers adapt their strategies to do exactly what you're doing. So if I think Frank wanted to do one.
Yeah, I think this dovetails nicely into what Helen said. When I look at automation, there are different ways to understand that word. And I think of it more in terms of how do you automate the checking at different parts of your development lifecycle. So a good example, Helen, you gave, in the design phase, how do you consider accessibility during the design? And there's a great plugin, for example, for Figma, that is an accessibility checker that you can run against your Figma designs and say, before you go send it to development, go and check this, right? And it checks for things like color contrast to make sure that the text contrasted with the background is within the W3C AA or AAA guidelines. And then, you still want to check it. You want to do another check after the developer has gotten their hands on it and created the code to make sure that they adhere to what was designed. But it's doing those checks all throughout the development lifecycle, and then complementing that with manual testing. There are certain things that can be done with regards to accessibility through automated checks. And there are certain things that absolutely need a person, somebody like Helen, who knows accessibility testing really well. And it's twofold. One is to make sure that the checks that were done in an automated fashion were accurate. And the second is to check those certain accessibility types that are defined in WCAG that are really hard to do through a machine, like text on an image or describing an image. Like those are maybe one day we'll get there with AI, but right now it really relies on a manual tester to go through and make sure that it works. And then finally, from when it comes to the things that can be automatically checked, it's not just through an automated script. It's also, we have one of our customers, Kellen, you'll get a kick out of this. They would use a digital ruler. They would take a screenshot, digital ruler for every tap area, and make sure that the tap area was within the guidelines. And that is a very time-consuming task. And so within Kobiton, at the end of every session, whether it's a manual session or an automated session, we run a set of checks, including the tap area size, and do that so that, that our customer no longer has to do that, and they can focus more on the more complicated tasks of accessibility testing.
I was going to say, Frank, please tell me there's a tool for them to do that now. Awesome. So I'm going to pop us over here to the next slide, but I wanted to pose a question to Helen because she's worked with so many different teams, either working with accessibility strategy or teaching them really from the ground up. How do you do this? How do you see teams starting to integrate either new accessibility strategies or level up their current accessibility plans within, their current life cycle?
Well, ideally, at the moment, there are a few mobile automation tools, but they often need the manual side of it, where you can get the checkers like to do the text, the size of the touch target, and they sometimes will have that as part of the automation, but they have to go through each screen to do it in turn.
Mm-hmm.
I know that some teams don't include accessibility checkpoints within their unit testing. And sometimes if they did that, it would save us having to find the items that are the easy fixes. So say, for instance, going back to the designs with the color contrast, if they check it at the design level, then it doesn't get built with hex codes that come out with incorrect contrast.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is an issue with iOS sometimes. Native apps get a sort of segmented overlay color, or the top part is not a true color of what's gone in. So you have to make it darker than it should be.
Interesting.
But yes, so you have to limit what you're checking for the operating system limitations, I think. You need to make sure the understanding of what you're limited by. So for instance, with native apps, when it comes to the code base being used, if I tell someone using Swift in iOS to use Swift UI features, they'll go, yeah, that's nice, and not really do anything because they sound very similar, but they're different. One has more in-baked accessibility. So the future removes me trying to guess the code base and suggest features or things that can be done by having the automation suggest what will fit with the code being used. Also, to just get those issues that I often see occurring in native apps. For instance, buttons without a label or buttons without a role, those sort of things can be easily found with automation. Whether it makes any sense, who knows? I could say something makes sense and someone else might not. It's all about the subjectivity as well. So by minimizing the chance of missing information, automation can help there a lot. And I do think it's good to introduce it as part of the unit testing as you build the code. It's checking what you're building is making sense before it goes in and gets integrated. Obviously, then you have the integration risk, and that's when you get the manual testers like me going through to make sure that it communicates with each other correctly, that what comes out is what you've put in, as I said, with the hex codes. But then it means I'm not logging issues that could have been easily avoided in the first place.
I may pose a question to both of you, and this is a little unplanned here. If you were to throw out a number, how much do you think organizations could save by integrating an automated strategy into their accessibility, or just like into their testing in general? Maybe that may be too broad, but like 50%, 30%, they could save 3x. They could release. How much faster do you think an organization could release by integrating something like this?
I think the first part is that there's a team currently doing accessibility testing, right? So if you're not doing it, then you're not going to save anything. But assuming that you're doing it, we've look through the WCAG and assess what can be done through automated checks and what are we doing with automated checks and what still needs to be done manually. And it's a little over 50-50 that can be done through automated checks. So I think, that's the order of magnitude of savings in terms of doing that. But the other part of this, Danielle, is it's not just about saving money, it's also expanding reach. So the good example that Helen had was the font sizes, like that's a really important check that can be done in an automated fashion, and do it across, instead of just the default text size, do it across 5 in an automated way across 5 or 6 different text sizes. That's great use of automation and automated checking.
So yes, it saves time, not just money, and sanity.
Yes, I was going more with the sanity side, and actually I was thinking just faster apps, to market, or say you have something that's going on or something's hot right now, how much faster could something come out for a team, maximize productivity?
Yeah, I mean, all testing is you have to measure risk and the effort, and
it's like you knew what slide was coming up. Yeah, we're gonna jump in here into the accessibility and risk side. This is not a scary type of risk, it's more mitigating risk and preparing everyone who's watching today to just, be aware and be prepared. So we're gonna hop right into it here. I can pass it right off to Helen to lead off, and then to Frank if you'd like.
Sure. Well, as we've already mentioned, an accessible app, it's not just about thinking about the edge cases, like the users that might not have any sight at all or any hearing, but about everybody who has a moment. Like I was saying, with my lack of coffee and no glasses in the morning, and lack of sleep due to young children. But anyway, we all have moments where our thinking is not as clear, or we might only have one hand free. For instance, you've gone shopping, got a bag of shopping in one hand, and you want to call for a taxi or a cab, sorry. One-handed ability to use your mobile is sometimes a bit limited. So making sure that those limitations and temporary issues can be addressed means that if your application is easy to use in different situations where people aren't always able to be given it their full attention, you'll probably have a greater audience, greater client base. People who know people that do have a more permanent disability are more likely to go for what they recommend is good for them, because family and friends support each other. So you get the good morale and the good customer feedback when it's simple. I always say, fellow KISS, keep it simple, but I never have a double S because I don't know many Simons. And the benefits to having a good accessibility plan. The main point I would say to teams building these apps that might not have accessibility as part of it, if you use a screen reader on an application, you'll quickly highlight coding that is not as good as it should be. I always say a screen reader is the best way of quickly checking how good the code is if you don't understand how to code.
And humbling yourself.
It can cause frustration. Make sure you've learned how to turn it off, or you could be stuck with not being able to log in with your PIN. And yes, legal cases are very prevalent in America. And there's also EU directives about how everything must be accessible. But we shouldn't be caring about that as much. We should be caring about making things work for the users. You can tell where my passion is.
Absolutely. Frank, did you want to touch on this at all before we move to the next
Yeah, I
slide?
mean,
That
I
was
know
very important.
it's sort of the, I do want to touch on the elephant in the room, which is, there is the original or the beachhead litigation case, and we talk about risk, is Robles versus Domino's in 2019. And Guillermo Robles sued Domino's Pizza because their website and their mobile app was not accessible. It went to the 9th District Court in the United States, and they ruled that the website and the mobile app needed to be accessible. Similar to the physical structures, digital structures as well needed to be accessible, which is, really, it was a great decision for making better user experiences and better accessible experiences. I don't think there would be the pressure or the emphasis that we have today had the 9th District Court not ruled that way. That's followed on. It's Hooters has been sued for similar cases, Beyonce. So it's not just that isolated case. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about, the litigation risk. And I know the important part is to get accessibility right. But there's the other side, which is to make sure that, because if you're focused, if you want to, there are other things that you would do as an enterprise when you look at risk mitigation for protecting, making sure that you have good documentation, that you've got reports, that you've got an audit trail of what was done to improve, and you've got a culture of accessibility. These are things that are good for business, but also good for protecting against litigation risk.
Although you should add a caveat, you can never guarantee.
That's
It's
right.
one of those
Yeah.
almost like ambulance chasers these days.
Well, and you look at, like, Kylie Jenner's website was sued. Like, that was probably, motivated off of a few things.
Shocking. Yeah.
Although actually, on top of that, since recent lockdown situations where people have been at home more, having to order things online more, that's also going hand in hand with the need to making things more accessible. Because can you imagine how many people suddenly realize that they could buy online that they couldn't before?
Yeah.
So the importance of your online market is a lot greater these days.
Yeah. There's a large retailer in the US, one of our customers, whose mobile revenue over the past couple of years has tripled. So it's and I think a lot of that is due to lockdown and people realizing, wow, I can just do this right in my hands.
Yes, there hasn't only been cons to this. There's been so many good things that have come out of this. And I say that, I shop online. I've always bought things online. And so it kind of ties into one of Kobiton's main tenets, which is mobile excellence. And you don't want your users just to enjoy your app. You want the mobile app experience to span from when the app is being created all the way to when I'm ordering something on my phone. And so you want that excellence to serve right through from design, which, you're integrating the accessibility through the testing when you're testing accessibility and testing all those other things to make sure your UI is beautiful and compared to the other, world's leading brands, etc. But we're gonna pop right in here. We have a 3-slide combo about mitigating these risks that we've just talked about, the and, the or the but. And we'll start with, how does this work? I know we've kind of, I like to call it conducting vast research at Kobiton here. I think it mostly is led by Frank. It's Frank's brainchild here, but there are tens of thousands of permutations on mobile device type plus operating system type that you can really test for here. how does this affect accessibility testing depending on the operating system? Could it vary vastly? This is a question I came in with today, so I'd love to get the answers.
Yeah, and I'm interested in Helen's view. I mean, when we look at it, you could go after, I don't think it makes sense to talk about the hundreds of thousands of permutations. Really, it's too mind blowing. And when you then add to that the different font sizes, like it's overwhelming. So I look at it more in terms of the most popular devices and their screen resolution, and testing a few different operating system versions is the best risk-based approach. And if you have the resources to do the font size on top of that. So, if you can there are about 20 to 25, if you look at Huawei, Google, Apple, Samsung as your 4 major manufacturers, and you look at the popular or their popular devices and the screen resolution of those devices. On smartphones, you're dealing between 20 and 25 screen resolutions, and in tablets, you're at 10 to 15. So you're getting great coverage in terms of mitigating risk when you look at those 40 different device types. And then you can look at a couple of different operating system versions between those. That doesn't mean you need the permutations. Part of this is just allocating different operating system versions to each of those device types, and then iterating a few different font sizes. So I think that's when you do that, you're covering a large portion of the market. And I think on the other side of this, the user side, especially those with permanent disabilities, they are going to gravitate for, and I don't know, storytelling right now, but they're going to gravitate towards one of the more popular device types and operating systems than an obscure type for these reasons.
Helen, what's your
Yes.
take on this? Yeah.
I have to admit, I look at obviously Apple, because we know that for people that use a screen reader, Apple devices are best when it comes to mobile. They have, I think, about 70% of the market, according to surveys done by WebAIM. But also for Android, making sure that it's using the most popular screen reader as well, so TalkBack. Because there are lots of variations. You've also got the Windows Phone, you've got the BlackBerry. Everyone goes, what? Isn't that a fruit? Yes, it still exists.
It does.
So I go for the 2 most popular, iOS and Android, mainly because me, myself, and we don't have the time to test all those devices and so on. The team that I work with have variations, and you have the different tests that you cover according to the WCAG checkpoints. So making sure the different test types are covered, or the different assistive technologies are covered. But I also recommend to most people to not try and do it like a functional testing where you test every single page to make sure it works, but you do the end-to-end. You cover unique items, because a lot of patterns emerge from what the developers built, and you try to go for the template type approach, but it varies team to team. It might look like a template, but when you get testing it, you'll have very different issues. So when you get down to it, you need to make sure you test each high traffic page or path as of a bare minimum. And the hours to do that successfully, I think it was mentioned once by a lecturer, to fully test an operating system end to end with all the permutations would take hundreds of millions of years. We don't have that time. I'm not going to be alive that long. So that's why people go for the high risk, the bits that are more likely to be witnessed or used by the user base. And talk to the developers, find out where the patterns are, what are the repeating components, what are the unique components, and from there get a test plan. But I do recommend making sure that when it comes to doing any kind of testing, if you don't collaborate with the developers, you could be needle in a haystack kind of approach. It's, yeah, and I don't have hundreds of thousands of years to cover every single one.
And this is why we led with magic at the beginning of this. Yeah, I think this is really just the whole premise of what you guys were just digging into, but the importance of automation, going the happy path, while also being aware of edge cases, and the amount, did you say, Frank, between 20 and 25 devices?
20 and 25 smartphones, and then 10 to 15 tablets.
I just didn't want to run right over this slide without making sure we were connecting the dots here. But I think what's important is the next slide we have here is this accessibility tool set. So how are we doing this? Are there many ways teams can be doing this? Is there a one size fits all option? Or Helen and Frank, like from your different areas of expertise, what are you seeing in the market that people are choosing to do to serve?
Helen, you can go first.
It varies. The methodologies used within the companies can vary as well. For instance, trying to do a waterfall type audit in an agile environment is impossible because they keep changing stuff. How very dare they? So it does depend on the methodology being used. Some are trying to do it in-house with people that best intentions might not always know how to use the tools like the users use the tools, which is why training is always important. Nothing wrong with doing it in-house, just make sure at least some training has happened, because I feel like I'm being one of those stern school moms now. It is more about making sure that if you use the tools like the users, or understand what the users need, it helps. And training best practices and so on is something that comes in there. And also realizing that sometimes it is better for a third party to do the overall review, because you can get a little bit tunnel vision. When it comes to your own product, you focus on certain areas. And I know myself, when I test, if I don't have a partner in crime testing with me, I will miss bits because I focus on things like the text, zooming in and so on. Not always easy, but it's one of my areas that we're human. So that's why we always have a test plan based on the WCAG test success criterion to make sure that we meet each of those in the testing, or check for each of those in the testing. But it is quite a large test plan.
Yeah, and I think I covered some of these tools that can be used like in Figma early in the design phase, and then using a lot of our customers use Kobiton because different manual testers are actually doing the testing. So we support Android TalkBack on the devices, and we support the iOS accessibility keyboard. So if you want to do manual testing and you don't want to have the device in hand, you can do all of those through Kobiton. So we're a popular tool for our customers. And I think that's when you couple that with some of the automated checking, so you've got the ability to balance this between automated checks and manual testing, with a full audit report of what was tested and what the output was. So you can demonstrate that with evidence that tests have been done and that you've created defects One of our customers has 3,000 devices on Kobiton, and they are doing quite a bit of accessibility testing across those devices.
I think I'm going to coin the term empower the manual tester, but you could say empower with an M instead of an E. Awesome. So here are some of our takeaways from today. Just a quick summary of really everything we've gone into. I wanted to also take this opportunity, if you guys don't mind, a quick lightning round of some questions I've gathered here that have come in during the webinar. So you guys can pick these up as you will. Maybe we'll start with Frank and go to Helen and bounce back and forth. But yeah, as we have this up on the screen for our viewers to peruse, I'll just mention the first question here. So it says, Frank mentioned the term accessibility types and talked about different phases in the development lifecycle and ways these different accessibility types can be checked. Is that something you can make available to the attendees today?
Sounds like a good blog post, Danielle.
You're just teeing me right up. Yes, we can serve that up, and if we can get Helen's buy-in, we can co-launch with Teslio. How about that?
Sounds good.
Helen can be my editor.
Yeah.
Awesome. So number 2, we have, what are the most common accessibility guidelines or types that apps need to adhere to today? I know we've talked about, I say it's WCAG. Helen, you say WCAG. Is there a proper way to say that?
As long as you don't say WCAG, which a lot of people do because they add extra sounds in the middle. But no, it is WCAG. I shorten it to WCAG because I'm one of those people that shortens it but don't completely changes it. But it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. When it gets to WCAG 3, the WC part will become W3C, as in who authors it, because it's a known acronym for the guidelines. At the moment, we are on the published version 2.1, but are expecting 2.2. They originally were written before the first smartphone had a screen reader. So they were released WCAG 2 in 1998, I believe it was. And Apple did their first screen reader not long afterwards, which meant that to start off with, they didn't have mobile in mind when it came to accessibility. People using their mobile to access things was not as heard of as it is now. Was it 2008? I could be making it up with the years. Anyway.
We can clarify on session number 2. But you're
I
right.
think it was 2008, yes.
I think that's around the time the first iPhone came out. It was,
yes.
Yeah.
I just trying to feel younger by making it a lot sooner. No, but that was WCAG 2 that came out 2008, and I should know better because I work well, I do volunteer work at the W3C, so I will be told off by the others. Anyway, so 2008 for WCAG 2. So it wasn't mobile driven at all because it was not the norm at that point. However, 10 years later, when we get to 2.1 in 2018, yes, it wasn't 20 years because that would have been, anyway. So then they introduced a few more mobile specific things like the orientation not being limited to portrait, the touch target size. It was going to be AA. It was moved to AAA because it wasn't quite agreed upon. In 2.2, I believe it's going back to AA. There is a lot to and fro, but basically the main things you should be focusing on is the accessibility guidelines. As although they relate to HTML and web content, the ideas and principles behind them do transfer. So ones like keyboard navigation, it doesn't have to be a Bluetooth keyboard. It can be when you're using a screen reader, the finger gestures you use to navigate. Does it do the same without the screen reader? so the mouse would be the same as the non-aided finger doing the touch screen. There's so many bits. It's not always a strict translation, but more about, is the user who uses different ways of navigating able to do it? Is the person that's viewing the application able to see the screen correctly with the colors? I know some, when it comes to mobile, believe that the AAA requirement of 7:1 for a contrast ratio is better, because we've all been on that sunny day out with your phone. Who can see what's on their screen?
No
Yeah.
one.
So yes, long-winded answer there, but the short answer is the accessibility guidelines with a pinch of salt for some of them, but it's getting less about the web and more about digital.
And these are all housed within WCAG.
Within the W3C that make the web content accessibility guidelines,
Okay.
or author them, I should say. And they are authored by lots of individuals in different areas of the accessibility world, different companies that come together and have lots of great discussions on it.
Perfect. Okay, because I wanted to make sure we were calling out anything that anyone wanted to look up or look into. So I'll combine the last two here just because I think they're pretty similar and you kind of touched on them, Helen, before we wrap up here. But the first one is my app automatically compliant if I'm running through an automated process to test for accessibility? I think I've learned something here and I'll say no, because you should integrate manual. And then the second question is, how do I know if I'm compliant with all the right guidelines? And Helen, I think you did dig into that, but I wanted to give you and Frank the opportunity to touch on these last two questions, if you wanted.
I'll let Frank go first. He's more succinct than
yeah,
I
I think the yeah, on the first question that you just went through, yeah, I don't think we need to answer. The second one, how do you know if you're compliant? I think it's a combination of tools, finding the right partner. You know, you have someone like Helen who's got just a breadth of knowledge in this area and can be your partner in knowing how to interpret the WCAG, which, as you know, sort of where we started, was it can be pretty complicated to understand. And ultimately, as a tester, verifying the accessibility of a mobile application for your organization, you're responsible for knowing what it says, and it's hard to read. So finding a good partner there is both on the automated check side and on the manual verification side is an imperative.
And I think to add to that, the final cherry on the cake is sometimes you don't know until you let the users give you feedback. But that's a different area of accessibility stroke usability, when you have people with disabilities running through your app and letting you know what works for them. But I always say leave that for either once you've got the main items checked off, or when you're willing to have someone swear at you because they can't use your app. Either one.
Okay. And we will be digging into these things further in sessions 2 and 3 of this series. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today. And of course, Frank and Helen, for your expertise and commentary. If you guys, you viewers, have any questions, reach out to us. We are not shy. As you can tell, we have our Kobiton and Teslio contact information here below. And we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks.